Just see all these people. Right?
All right, we'll say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Adar, Benjamin and Elise Wall of Eretz Yisrael. We're proud to sponsor all the incredible worldwide work that the SOTC family does on behalf of Jewish people. Our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Ayal and Sarah Steinberg, and the schus of continued health for Shulam Ischana Bas Susha and for an ultimate refuah shalema. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all those who need a refuah shavan together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. Okay, so we don't keep less than 6 sheep in the Lishkas Hatzlaim at all times. Why 6? This is what we did this yesterday. In order to ensure that we have enough on hand for Shabbos and in the event that Rosh Hashanah falls out immediately after Shabbos. That way, again, remember, we have 1 Talmud in the morning, 1 Talmud in the afternoon, so 2 Tamidin, 2 sheep per day for the purpose of the carbon Talmud. 3 days, that's a minimum of 6 sheep. So the Gemara says, okay, now we'll say, what the Gemara says, Hechi Dami, what exactly, what's the case? What is it that we're trying to plan for over here? So the Gemara says, Ilema de Islay Tamidin Musafin Tuva, Havu. So the Gemara says, Ilema de Islay Tamidin Musafin Tuva Havu. If we're talking about a case where already you have enough animals on hand, both for the Talmud offering as well as for the Musafin, then that's well beyond the necessary, or that's well beyond the 6 that are mentioned over here. Ella, the Leslie. Rather, you must be talking about where we don't have enough animals, both for Tamidin and Musafin. And what do you see from here? Which was the overarching question of yesterday's daf. Ushmamina Tamidin Adifi. And you see from here that halacha l'maisa, when you have to make a choice between Musaf and Tamid, we go ahead and we choose Tamid. Okay, to which the Gemara says, not necessarily though, li'olam de'islay. It's quite possible that we're talking about a case where you have the requisite number of animals. So what's the pshat? As Rabbi said, again, if we're talking about that we have more than enough animals, then what is this halacha, what is this din of needing a minimum of 6 sheep on hand in the lishkas hatzlaim at all time? If we have more than enough anyway, what's the concern? This is actually quite interesting, to which the Gemara says, this is what we're talking about over here. This is a different halacha. The halacha is, the Gemara is suggesting that at any given moment in the Beis HaMikdash, in the Lishkas HaTlaim, you have to have a minimum of 4 Tamidin that have passed the required inspection of 4 days. As we're going to see in just a moment, Umani ben Bagbagi. Ben Bagbag, what does ben Bagbag say? Desanya ben Bagbag Omer, Minayin letamid shetaun bikar dalid yomim kodem shchita. How do we know that the carbon tamid requires an inspection or needs to be inspected for 4 days prior to use? So Rabbi said this is a very unique halacha. In general, we know before you offer up a carbon always has to undergo a multi-point inspection, right? And so it requires. You have to make sure that it's free of any movement. The carbon tamid has an additional halacha. Not only is there a pre-offering inspection, but what you need what's called bikur dalid yamim. It must be on the premises of the Beis HaMikdash for 4 days prior to offering and inspected throughout that entire process. So the Gemara says, the Gemara is suggesting that's what we're referring to over here. When we speak about this idea, then in the Lishkas Hatzlam, you have to have a minimum of six sheep in that Lishkas Hatzlam at all time. That's 6 sheep that have undergone the 4-day process. So in other words, you need to go ahead and essentially have a 3-day lead time on the carbon tamid, making sure that you always have 2 sheep. And this, by the way, this is even if you have plenty of animals, right? This is not a din in not having enough animals. This is a din in making sure that you have a 3-day lead time, ultimately, again, in making sure that you have animals that have passed the necessary 4-day pre-offering inspection process. So Ben Bagbag says, how do we know? This is actually very interesting. How do we know that the Tamid requires Bikur Dalid Yamim? How do I know that the Tamid ultimately requires inspection 4 days prior to its offering? Talmud Lomar, Tishmeru lakriv li b'moado. So the pasuk by the Karban Tamid says, Tishmeru, you shall go ahead and you shall guard it. Lakriv li b'moado, to go offer it up in its appointed time. Ulahalon hu omer, and again later on it says, and I will say it's actually very interesting. Later on is by Karban Pesach. Later on it says, V'haya lachem lemishmeres. You shall go ahead and keep the Karban lemishmeres. The mishmeres means to go ahead and guard it ad arba asayom, until the 14th. Now again, I want to point out something very interesting over here. This is by Pesach Mitzrayim. This is by the first Pesach. What was the din of Karban Pesach by the first Pesach? The halacha was that you had to buy it on the 10th, and you had to hold it with you ultimately until the 14th. Now, I just want to point out something fascinating, which is, this was a halacha by Pesach Mitzrayim, not a halacha by Pesach Doros. In future generations, there's no obligation to purchase the Karban Pesach on the 10th. You purchase it whenever you want. You just have to have it ready to go on the 14th. But nevertheless, the Gemara is learning out the halachos of Tamid from the halachos of Pesach Mitzrayim. Just like on Pesach Mitzrayim, you had to take the animal on the 10th, and you had to have it in your home and guard it for 4 days. So too by Karban Tamid, you need a 4-day inspection prior to the offering of the Karban Tamid. And again, it's a bit of a gzera shava, tishmeru lemishmeres. Malahalon taun beaker arba yom kodem shchita. Just like by Pesach Mitzrayim, you have to inspect the animal for 4 days prior to shchita. Afkan, so too by Karban Tamid, taun beaker arba yomim kodem shchita. You must inspect the animal for 4 days prior to the slaughter. So Rabbi says, interestingly enough, the Gemara is suggesting that's what we mean. When the Gemara said before, Tashma in pochsim mishisha tlaim hamavukarm belishkas hatlaim, that you always have to have a minimum of 6 inspected sheep. We thought we're talking about a case of like limited resources. It turns out no, it means you have to have a minimum of 6 sheep which have undergone the 4-day pre-slaughter or the 4-day pre-shchita inspection process. That's the runway that you have to have for the sacrificial service of the Karban Tamid. To which the Gemara says, interestingly enough, and again, now, well, okay, let's go on. I'm really Ravina. So Ravina says to Ravashi, Hani Shisha Shivahavu. Well, one second, that it shouldn't be 6 sheep, it should be 7. Why? Ta'ika ditzafra ditlasa v'shapsa. Because if we're concerned about what? So remember again, what calendrical reality are we, or what calendrical possibility are we concerned about? Rosh Hashanah falling out after Shabbos. Rosh Hashanah is a 2-day Yom Tov even in Eretz Yisrael. So remember again, so we have Shabbos, Sunday, Monday. So 6 sheep, 2 for Shabbos, 2 for Sunday, 2 for Monday. One second, you should need 7. Why should you need 7? Tuesday morning, right? Because again, remember it's Yom Tov, so you should need for Tuesday morning as well. To which the Gemara says that's 7. Well, Tamech, the truth is using that logic. Tamyav, you should need 8. Why? What about the Tamid Shal Ben Arbayim? What about the afternoon Tamid on Friday? Right? Why aren't you including that in the count as well? To which the Gemara says, no. Friday's not a problem. Halo Kashya de la Basar de Akriv Kamar. No, we're starting the count after Friday. In other words, we're assuming over here that you have Erev Shabbos, that you have Friday's Karban Tamidin covered, and therefore again it's Shabbos, Sunday, Monday. Okay, top of Nun, 50a. I mikol makom shivahavu. But still, what about Tuesday morning? Right? We still need something for Tuesday morning. Ella Tana ba'almakai. The Gemara says, no. You're getting mixed up. The Gemara doesn't literally mean that you actually have to plan for the possibility of Shabbos and then Rosh Hashanah. That's not what the Gemara is saying. The Gemara is using the Shabbos Rosh Hashanah model as like a memory device. How many Karban Tamidin, how many checked, inspected Karban Tamidin do you have to have on hand at any given moment? How many? 6. How do you remember that number? Imagine enough for Shabbos and Rosh Hashanah. It's not literally that we're preparing for Shabbos, Rosh Hashanah. It's that Shabbos, Rosh Hashanah becomes the model. That's the preparation unit that we keep in mind for. Tana ba'almakai. So the Tana is just talking stam. He's not saying literally you have to prepare for when Rosh Hashanah falls out after Shabbos. Rather, again, he's just talking in general. Umay kedei l'Shabbos ubeis yom tov shel Rosh Hashanah. And what does it mean when he says that you have to have enough for Shabbos and the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah? Stimna ba'alma. It's just a simon. It's just a siman. So again, it's just kind of like a memory device. How many hours? I guess you could say you need 6, or you could just say the amount of karbanos you need for Shabbos and Rosh Hashanah. How much is that? That's 6, and that's halacha. Dekanami diktani. Gemara says you can even see this, you can infer this from the way that it's written. It says kidei l'Shabbos. It says ultimately again you have to have. It says kidei l'Shabbos v'lo katani l'Shabbos u'lebeis yamim tovim shel Rosh Hashanah. So interestingly enough, if the Gemara literally meant that you have to have enough for Shabbos and Rosh Hashanah, it would have said l'Shabbos u'lebeis yamim tovim. For Shabbos, instead it says kidei l'Shabbos. Enough, almost, enough to be ready if there were a Shabbos followed by a Rosh Hashanah. So interestingly enough, halacha l'maisa, we're not actually preparing for Rosh Hashanah falling out after Shabbos, but rather, again, we're just trying to come up with the number that is necessary to have on hand in the Beis HaMikdash. And I'll point out something interesting. This, in fact, is the halacha. The Rambam brings down in Hilchos Tamidin and Musafin, Ein pochsin, this is in Parak Aleph Halacha Tes. Ein pochsin mishisha tlan hamavukarn belishkas hatlan shel mikdash. That in the lishkas hatlan, right, in the chamber of the sheep, which was actually one of the 4 chambers in what we call the Beis Hamokad, which was a chamber on the interior of the Beis Hamikdash. So you always had to have 6 inspected sheep ready to go. V'yimuchanim kodim yom hakrava. And ultimately, again, they had to be ready before the day of offering. It's okay. Okay. So I missed it. And they had to be ready. They had to be ready before the offering 4 days. So I just want to point out. So this is really interesting. So halacha l'maisa, this is how the Rambam paskins. So Rambam literally says you have to have 4 sheep ready in the Lishkas Hatzlaim at all times. They were inspected for the 4 days leading up to slaughter. Despite that, interestingly enough, they had to be re-inspected right before they were slaughtered as well. So again, that's over here. Just so you see. This is what's called the Beis Hamokad. This section over here is called the Beis Hamokad because there was a big fire. That yellow over here is a fire over here that the Kohanim would use to warm themselves during the winter months. And then again, you could see over here it says Tzilaim. It says Tzilaim. You probably can't really see it, but okay. Thank you. Right over here it says Tzez. Right. So this is all called the Beis Hamokad. And this is the Tzilaim right over here. So there was this chamber, which makes sense, because remember, Shechita was done in this area over here. So people often think, now what I want to point out, there is something else called, All right, we'll come back to this. They sold livestock on Harabayas also. So there's another place called the Lishkas HaSeirim, but again, when we speak about Karbanos, this was the Lishkas HaTlaim. Now, not all animals were kept here. The only thing that were kept here were really just 6 sheep. So a relatively small amount of livestock kept in this area. This was Dafka, the 6 sheep at a 4-day lead time for the carbon tamid. Incredible. Okay. And about says like Ben Bagbag. Incredible. It's also interesting that, okay, so a lot to say on this. If we have time at the end, I'm conscious of the time, but if we have time at the end, this concept of Tamid Ta'un Bikor. Tamid Ta'un Bikor is an interesting idea as well. But we'll come back to it if we have some time at the end. Let's go right there. 2 dots. Nun Amud Aleph 50a. Says the Gemara. Lo ekrivu kevas baboker. Amr Reb Shimon b'kula ha'isa kriva ben abayim shein mechanchin esem mizbeach hazav ela b'ktoras hasamim. So remember again, the Mishnah then went on to a fascinating discussion about what happens if you miss the carbon tamid, right? What happens if you miss the morning tamid? Then again, halacha l'maisa, after you miss the morning tamid, you can't make it up, but you could offer up the afternoon tamid. Reb Shimon says that's only true if you missed the morning tamid by some type of extenuating circumstance. But if you missed it because of pshia, because some type of negligence, then we penalize you. You can't even do the afternoon tamid. Same idea with the ketoras. Now, interestingly enough, with the ketoras, if you missed morning ketoras, so what do? You could offer up the entire ketoras in the afternoon. And then the Mishnah said, because the Mizbeach can only be consecrated through the offering of ketoras. So now the Gemara asks, Chinuch, Man dekar shmei. Why is the Mishnah bringing up the consecration of the Mizbeach? Why is this here in the Mishnah? To which the Gemara says, you're right. In reality, there is a piece missing from the Mishnah, and here is how it is supposed to be read. Lo ekrivu kevas baboker, lo yakrivu ben ha'arbayim. If they do not offer up the keves, if they do not offer up the sheep in the morning, so this is the Tamid Shal Shachar. If they do not offer up the Tamid Shal Shachar in the morning, you can't offer it up in the afternoon. Now, when is that so? This is talking about if the Mizbeach was not consecrated. Now, both say, just a word about this. When we speak about consecration of the Mizbeach, consecration is done the first time. It's not saying that there's a daily consecration. In other words, there's a one-time consecration of the Mizbeach. So now what the Gemara is saying is like this. If you did not offer up the morning Tamid, so now the Gemara says, this is the Chisrei Mechsra. This is the Gemara now expanding upon what the Mishnah really meant to convey. If you did not offer up the morning Tamid, you cannot offer up the afternoon Tamid. When is that so? When the Mizbeach has not yet been consecrated. Aval nischanech ha-Mizbeach, because you're going to both say, why is that? Now, I'm going to give you coming attractions. Why is that? Because apparently what the Gemara is going to hold, Mishnah holds, is that consecration of the Mizbeach only occurs through the morning Tamid. So therefore, if you failed to offer the morning Tamid, therefore the Mizbeach was not consecrated. If the Mizbeach was not consecrated, you can't offer up the afternoon Tamid. Aval, nischanech ha-Mizbeach, yakrivu ben arbayim. But if the Mizbeach was already consecrated and you missed the morning Tamid, then under those circumstances, you can offer it up ben ha'arbayim. You can offer it up in the after. You can offer up the afternoon Tamid. The Gemara says, Rabbi Shimon says, Emasai, when is that so? That if you missed the morning Tamid, you could offer up the afternoon Tamid. Bizman shahayu anusin o shogegin. If you missed the morning Tamid either because of an ones or a shogeg, avalim hayu mezidin. But if you intentionally missed the morning offering, lo ekrivu, the Gemara says, lo ekrivu kevas baboker, lo yakrivu ben arbayim. So again, Rabbi say this is Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Shimon holds that if you intentionally, in other words, if it's through some type of negligence or intentionality, you missed the morning Tamid, you may not offer up the afternoon Tamid. Similarly, lo ektiru kitaras baboker, yaktiru ben arbayim. If you did not offer up the morning kitoras, you shall go ahead and offer it up in the afternoon. So the Gemara says, Minahani. So where do I know this? Now again, I both say, so what the Gemara just espoused was a fascinating rule, which is that when it comes to consecration of the Mizbeach, consecration of the Mizbeach occurs only through the morning Tamid. Therefore, if the Mizbeach was not yet consecrated and you missed the morning Tamid, you cannot offer up the afternoon Tamid. What do you have to wait for? Essentially, the next morning to consecrate the Mizbeach. However, if the Mizbeach was already consecrated and you missed the morning Tamid, you could still go ahead and do the afternoon Tamid. Again, Rabbi Shimon says, when is that so? That's assuming you didn't miss the Tamid because of some type of negligence or intentionality. So how do I know this? How do I know that the Mizbeach is consecrated through the morning Tamid? The pasuk says, "You shall offer up the second sheep in the afternoon." What are we darshan from here? Sheni ben arbayim, v'lo rishon ben arbayim. It is only the second one that can be done in the afternoon, not the first one. Which means when is that so? In other words, the first offering on the Mizbeach, i.e. the consecratorial offering on the Mizbeach, cannot be ben arbayim, cannot be in the afternoon. It has to be the first one. So when is that so? Ultimately, when the Mizbeach was not consecrated, but if the Mizbeach was, maybe inaugurated is a better word than consecrated, right? But if the Mizbeach was inaugurated, it was consecrated. The Mizbeach was consecrated already, even the first one can be in the afternoon. So we'll say, so again, a very important halacha. The Gemara is suggesting over here that when the Mizbeach ultimately is consecrated, which means when it's put into service, it is put into service with the morning Tamid. And therefore, if you miss the morning Tamid, you cannot offer up the afternoon tamid. That's not a penalty. It's just a de facto reality. So halacha l'maisa, again, if you miss the consecration of the morning tamid, you can't offer up the afternoon. However, if the mizbeach has already been consecrated, and you miss the morning, you could offer up the tamid in the afternoon. Rabbi Shimon qualifies that once again. Rabbi Shimon emasai. When is that so? Bizman shahayu anusin o shogigin. That's when you missed the morning tamid, either b'shogig or b'shogig or ba'ones. Ones is extenuating circumstances. Shogig is accidental. Avalam hayu mazidin. But if you intentionally missed the morning tamid, lo ekrivu kevas baboker. Lo yakrivenu bein arbayim. But I will say, if you intentionally, missed the morning tamid, then that's it, you're out. Then you may not go ahead and offer up the tamid later on in the afternoon. Lo hiktiru kitoras baboker, yaktiru bein arbayim. So that's the case of tamid. So that's the case of carbon tamid. What's the case of kitoras? Lo hiktiru kitoras baboker, yaktiru bein arbayim. If you did not offer up kitoras in the morning, you could offer it up in the afternoon. So the Gemara says, "V'chi kohanim chatu mizbeach batal." Now I'm going to say, interestingly enough, so here's our model. Let's just reframe the model for just a moment. A couple of very important facts. Number one, when initially consecrating the mizbeach itself is consecrated through the offering of the tamid shal shachar. Okay. Therefore, if you missed that carbon, essentially you can't do anything else on the mizbeach until the next day that you could consecrate it with the tamid shal shachar. But assuming the mizbeach has already been consecrated, if you missed the morning tamid, the tamid shal shachar, no problem. Just do the tamid shal bein arbayim, the afternoon tamid. Rabbi Shimon just qualifies that. That's assuming that the omission of the tamid shal shachar was accidental or ones. But if it was intentional, apparently we penalize you, and you can't go ahead and offer up the afternoon tamid. Okay, now the Gemara asks an interesting question. The Gemara says, I don't understand. So let me get this straight. If let's say the Kohanim intentionally, for whatever the reason, didn't offer the morning tamid, so that means now no afternoon tamid. So the Gemara says, V'chi Kohanim chatu mizbeach batal. Because the Kohanim sinned, the Mizbeach should remain dormant, right? In other words, it's a good kasha. The Gemara says, so I understand, so the Kohanim made a mistake, right? A big mistake. So because the Kohanim made a mistake, so the Mizbeach shouldn't have its tamid shal bein arbayim. What does that mean? Amarav, no. It means to say, lo yakrivu hein, aval achirim yakrivu. Fascinating. So Rabbi says, no. Chas shalom. Of course the tamid shal bein arbayim is going to be offered. But rather, again, who do we penalize? We penalize those Kohanim who should have had the right to go ahead and offer up the tamid shal bein arbayim because they were negligent in the morning. We penalize them and we do not allow them to offer up the carbon in the afternoon. Incredible. Okay, so we'll say that's tamid. Let's now transition to kitoras. Lo iktiru kitoras baboker yaktiru bein arbayim. If you did not offer up kitoras in the morning, you could offer it up in the afternoon. And interestingly enough, if you notice, by kitoras, it's not a parallel discussion, right? By kitoras, there's no such halacha of if you didn't intentionally offer it up, or if you intentionally omitted it, there's no discussion like that. Which the Gemara says, why? So interestingly enough, the Gemara says, kitoras is different than tamid. Why? Number one, it's not as common. Lo shchicha. Now that's a fascinating thing to say because actually kitoras is as common, right? Because remember again, you offer up the tamid twice a day and you offer up the kitoras twice a day. What the Gemara means is like this. Rashi points this out. The carbon tamid is an ola. There are plenty of olos which are offered up over the course of the day in the Beis Hamikdash. So olos are common. Kitoras, however, as a carbon, kitorai incense as an offering is unique. So because it is unique, therefore, number one, it's unique. Number two, I'll say something amazing, uma'atra. Ma'atra means that offering of the kitoras is a skula for wealth. It's a skula for wealth. So because of those two things, number one, because it is, not shchiach, because it's not common, uma'atra, Rashi says over here, it's the first line in Rashi, ma'asheres. Ultimately, it engenders wealth. Kidichsiv yasimu kitora ba'apecha uksib basrei barech Hashem chelo. So again, I'll say so. The juxtaposition of yasimu kitora ba'apecha. This is the bracha to Shevet Levi. He will put kitoras, literally again, the smell of kitoras in your nostrils, and Baruch Hashem chelo, Hashem will bless his multitudes. So because kitoras is a skula for wealth, and because it is generally, we'll call it infrequent, therefore, lo pashi, no one's going to be negligent. So both say, see what's interesting over here. Now the whole sugya makes a bit more sense, which is, what is Reb Shimon? Reb Shimon is concerned that if the Kohanim intentionally omitted the carbon tamid, that's negligence. And apparently we have to be concerned for that type of negligence. Why? Because since it's common to offer tamid, people will say, anything that occurs with greater frequency, on one hand, there's a beauty to it because it's regular. On the other hand, sometimes people just forget to see the beauty in the things that occur regularly. Therefore, there's a penalty. If you don't offer up the tamid shel shachar, you can't offer up the tamid shel ben arbaim. That is a penalty. Apparently, again, Reb Shimon did not feel you did not need a similar penalty by ketoras. Since ketoras, number one, is less frequent, and since ketoras ultimately is a skula for wealth, the Kohanim were not negligent when it came to ketoras. And therefore, even if for some reason it was omitted in the morning, we're not concerned about any type of ongoing negligence. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, even if it is omitted in the morning, you could just go ahead and offer it up in the afternoon as well. Quite incredible. I will say, I'll just mention this, that this concept of ketoras being a skula for wealth. So again, this is brought down, and even the idea, by the way, of saying Parshas HaKetoras. Right? Obviously, today we don't have the opportunity to go ahead and offer up the Ketoras yet, but actually reciting Pitim HaKetoras, Parshas HaKetoras, which is in Karbanos, right? It's the section right before Ezu Makomon. The Sfarim bring down is a tremendous skula for financial success, for Hatzlacha in Parnasa. So some are even makbid to be able to say it's from a klaf. Apparently there's even a greater inyan, ultimately again, of skula for success in material pursuits, in Parnasa. But again, it stems from this idea. That's why Kohanim, interestingly enough, were only given one chance to do ketoras. Right? In other words, once you got the opportunity to do ketoras, generally, you didn't get a second chance because we wanted to make sure that all of the Kohanim had the opportunity to do so, quite literally spread the wealth. Again, Jose, sometimes the beautiful part is, we're all looking for success. We're all looking for success. We're looking for spiritual success, and we're all looking for material success as well. Sometimes we don't even realize the beautiful tools that are at our disposal each and every day. So there's that section, right? Literally, again, in that section of Karbanos, it's not just a pshat that there were extra blank pages in the siddur, and the editor decided to fill stuff in there, because he didn't want blank pages. There's a lot of beautiful stuff in there. In between brachas and mizmor shir, there's a treasure. There's treasure that's there. Ezum Makomon, like we learned together, literally, again, there's a section that we could say every single day that is a skula for material success. You still have to go to work, right? And you still have to work very hard. But don't we all want all the help we can get in being able to find material success in this world? And it's there. At least another spiritual crutch is right there in front of us every day. It's like so many other beautiful spiritual gifts that are just waiting for us to take advantage of them. All right, let's go back there. Says the Gemara. Good. Amar Reb Shimon v'kula ha'isa kreva ben arbaim shemischan chenes hamizbeach hazav ela b'ktaras hasamim shal ben arbaim. Okay, so the Gemara says as follows. So Reb Shimon says, now, interestingly enough, Ketores is different than Tamid, right? As we've established already, if you miss the morning Tamid, so even if you could offer up the afternoon Tamid, once the morning Tamid is done, it's done. You can't offer it up. By Ketores, it's different. It sounds like even if you missed the morning Ketores, you could go ahead and offer up the whole amount of Ketores in the afternoon. And then the Gemara says, the Mishnah says, because the Mizbeach was only consecrated through the Ketores of the afternoon. The Gemara says, Vatanya, Biktar Samin Shal Shachar, Batul in the Braisa, that it was in fact the morning Ketores that consecrated the Mizbeach. Now, again, remember, two different Mizbeachos. Where is Ketores offered? Ketores is offered on the Mizbeach Hazav, the golden Mizbeach, the golden Mizbeach, right, inside of the Beis HaMikdash, small altar, only used for incense. So the Gemara says, tonight, it's Machlokas Tanaim, Amra Abai says, so Machlokes Tanaim, which kitoras, morning kitoras or afternoon kitoras, was responsible for consecrating the Mizbeach. It makes more sense to say it was the afternoon kitoras. Because the pasuk says, in the morning, baboker, baboker, and when you arrange the candles on the menorah, you shall go ahead and offer up the kitoras, right? So this pasuk is talking about kitoras. Victor, I love Aaron, kitoras on baboker, baboker, betivas and ros yaktirena. So interestingly enough, the Torah equates or I should say, aligns the offering of the kitoras with the arrangement of the menorah. So listen to this. Gemara says, "I lav da'avid hadlaka me'arta hatava b'tzafra mehecha." So you're going to say, were it not that you arranged the mizbeach, were it not that you arranged the menorah in the evening, hatava b'tzafra, ultimately, again, the rearranging it in the morning, where would that occur? So what you see over here is that the primary arrangement of the menorah obviously is in the afternoon, right? Or the kindling is in the afternoon. And therefore, again, afterwards, the arrangement is the next morning. It's just like the primary use of the menorah is in the afternoon, so too the kitoras, which is equated with the menorah, the primary kitoras is the afternoon kitoras. And that's the kitoras, ultimately, again, which would consecrate the Mizbeach. And the one who learns that the primary kitoras was the morning kitoras, so Gamra Mizbeach ha'olah. He learns it out from the Mizbeach ha'olah, from the carbon tamid, Ma'ala halon v'tamid shal shachar, Afkan b'ktoras hasamim shal shachar, just like by the tamid, it's the morning tamid that consecrates the mizbeach. So too by the ketores, it is the morning ketores that consecrates the golden mizbeach. So as I say, just interestingly enough, halacha l'maisa, see what's fascinating over here is everyone agrees that it is the morning tamid which consecrates the large exterior altar. Right, this carbon tamid is what consecrates what we call the mizbeach achitzon, and everyone agrees that it's the ketores that consecrates the inner golden mizbeach. There's machlokes. Is it the morning ketores or is it the afternoon ketores? That's the machlokes. For the last shulchan ela b'lechem hapanim b'Shabbos. Same way again, I saw again halacha l'maisa. The shulchan is consecrated through the placement of the lechem hapanim, the showbread on the shulchan itself. So the Gemara says. B'Shabbos. Now, interestingly enough, when is the lechem hapanim placed on the shulchan? When? On Shabbos. So what it sounds like is the shulchan is only consecrated on Shabbos when the bread is placed there. Ela b'chol echnuchi hudelo mechanech hakidushe mikdash. So I say, interestingly enough, the Gemara says, what does that mean? Does that mean that during the week, you can't consecrate the shulchan, right? Because the bread is only placed on Shabbos. But perhaps the shulchan could still be mekadesh the loaves. Which the Gemara says, no. He gufa kamash balon the chinuch the kiddush the shulchan b'Shabbosu. No, the Gemara is actually teaching me that both chinuch and kiddush, that both ultimately again the consecration of the shulchan as well as the consecration of the loaves only could take place on Shabbos. Kidiktani seifa v'loas hamenorah ela b'shiva nerasa bein arbaim. So I say, interestingly enough, another halacha that both the consecration of the loaves and the consecration of the shulchan could only take place on Shabbos. That's when the loaves are placed on the shulchan. So the loaves become consecrated. So really there's this duality. The shulchan becomes consecrated through the placement of the loaves, and the loaves become consecrated through their placement on the shulchan. Fascinating. So the Gemara goes right there. The Gemara says, good. Tanrabanan. Zeu kitoras sha'al sali achid am mizbeach achison v'ara sha'haisa. So the Gemara goes on. The Gemara says, good. So Tanrabanan zeu kitoras sha'al sali achid am mizbeach achison v'ara sha'haisa. This was the kitoras that was used as an individual. So we'll say this is talking about over here. We'll talk about the offering of the Nisim. So that went on the outer mizbeach, and this was a unique event. So we'll say what we're saying over here is, there was one time in the history of the Jewish people that kitoras was offered up on this mizbeach, on the large mizbeach. And when was that? Heicha Amar Papa B'Nisim. This was the consecration of the tribal princes. So we'll say, interestingly enough, what that makes it sound like is kitoras of an individual is never offered up on the outer mizbeach, but it makes it sound like that it can be offered up on the inner mizbeach. Is that true? V'su Furthermore, it makes it sound like ketoris of an individual can't be offered up on the outer mizbeach, but again, for the tzibor can. Is that true as well? Vatanya. So we'll say, so I might have thought like this. I might have thought that an individual could go ahead and pledge, ultimately again ketoris, and he could bring it as an adava. The Korah ani ba motzas vasecha tishmar va'asisa. Talmud lomar lo salu alav ketores zdara. So therefore, I will say the pasuk says you will not bring on the mizbeach alien ketores, which means we'll say there is no such thing as an individual bringing ketoras. No such thing. There's no such thing as a personal ketoras offering. Yachol lo yehe yachid mevi she'in mevi chavasa kiyotzeba. So as I take a look at the last Rashi on that before we turn the page, Yachol yachid hu delo yavi ketoras nedava shari dinhu shlomatzini she'in mevi chavasa kiyotzeba shari ketoras chaval yachid lo matzinu. So I'm going to thought like this: the reason an individual can't bring an offering, a voluntary offering of ketoras, is because there's no parallel obligatory ketoras offering, right? So we'll say there's no such thing as an obligatory offering that the yachid brings. There's no such thing as an individual obligatory incense offering. So I thought that because there's no obligatory offering, therefore what? Therefore Allah might say can't bring it as an adava as well. Aval amadeis, aval tzibor, aval tzibor yehe maybe shemevi chova. But again, maybe the tzibor can. Maybe the tzibor can bring a voluntary ketoras offering. Why? Because we're going to both say, remember, the tzibor does bring an obligatory ketoras offering. Where does the tzibor bring an obligatory ketoras offering? Twice a day. Remember again, we'll say the ketoras that is offered up by the Kohen, on the golden altar each and every day, that is a communal offering. That's on behalf of Klal Yisrael. So I would have thought that since the tzibor can bring an obligatory ketoras offering, therefore they could also bring an adava, a voluntary offering, to which the Gemara says, Talmud lomar lo salu. Therefore the pasuk says, no, they may not bring it. So it's quite interesting. Apparently, there is no such thing as a voluntary ketoras offering. No such thing. Certainly not for an individual, because by an individual, there's not even an obligatory ketoras offering. But even by the tzibor, that does bring an obligatory ketoras offering, you cannot bring a ketoras offering binedava. Incredible. So I'm going to thought maybe it's just you can't bring a voluntary ketoras offering on the inner golden mizbeach, but you can bring it on the outer mizbeach. Talmud lomar es shemen amishcha ves ketoras asamim lakodesh kakol asher tzivisicha yasu. Ein lecha elamash amar be'inyan. Ultimately, the only thing you could bring is that which is stated in this context. And I will say what's stated in this context, right? Ultimately, again, that ketoras is brought as a communal offering on the Mizbeach HaPnimi, on the golden altar, and that is it. That is the only ketoras offering that is to be brought, nothing else. Papa says, Lomi bai kamar, Lomi bai tzibor al Mizbeach HaChitzon la ashkechan. So it goes without saying that the tzibor cannot bring ketoras on the outer Mizbeach, because such a construct is not found, right? There's no such thing as ketoras being brought on the outer Mizbeach. And certainly an individual cannot bring ketoras on the inner Mizbeach, because such a construct is not found as well. But even an individual bringing ketoras on the outer Mizbeach, which Rabbi say, there is a precedent for that. What's the precedent for that? The Nesiim, the offering of the tribal princes. They brought individual offerings of ketoras on the outer Mizbeach. So there is a construct for that, to which the Gemara says, no, Horas Shah Haisa. Not true. Not true. But say, Horas Shah Haisa means that was a unique circumstance. And because that was a unique circumstance, therefore Allah Chalamaisa, that is not to be replicated. So I will say, so a really fascinating idea, that as special and as incredible as ketoras is, ketoras only exists in a very narrow lane. It is only offered as a communal offering. It is only offered on the golden mizbeach, only offered as an obligatory offering, again, half in the morning, half in the afternoon, as we'll see, and ultimately, again, never offered as an adava, never offered up as a voluntary offering. Fascinating. Mishnah. Chavite Kohen Gadol, Lo hayu ba'in chatzoin. So let's remember again, Chavite Kohen Gadol is the carbon mincha of the Kohen Gadol that he brings every day. Rashi says over here, Chavite, Hainu minchas machvas Kohen Gadol, shemevi b'chol yom kidichsev, b'tzavis Aaron, machatzisa baboker al shem machvas. So let's remember again, it's called, so Chavite Kohen Gadol is a minchas machvas. Minchas machvas, Rabbi say, is, remember again, a deep dish mincha. Deep dish mincha. So this was brought every single day by the Kohen Gadol. Half of it was one is right. Half of it was brought in the morning. Half of it was brought in the afternoon. So Chaviti Kohen Gadol lo hayu ba'in chatzoin. It was not brought in halves. So Rabbi say, Ella maybe isaron shalim b'chatzeo. Now again, Rabbi say, it's okay. So a little bit of background about this. So the Chaviti Kohen Gadol was made up of an isaron of flour. So half of the isaron was offered up in the morning, and half of the isaron was offered up in the afternoon. So you might have thought like this, okay, now this was brought from the Kohen Gadol's own funds. So you would have thought that perhaps the Kohen Gadol could bring half an isaron in the morning, he goes home for lunch, and after lunch you bring the other half of isaron. The Mishnah says, no, that's not how it happened. In the morning, he had to bring the full isaron with him. He had to bring the full isaron with him. Look at Rashi. Lo hayu ban chatzoin, shelo yavi chatzi isaron baboker mi beisa v'chatzi isaron ba'erev. So again, you can't bring half in the morning, half in the afternoon. Again, so the novelty was, even though half was brought in the morning and half was brought in the afternoon, the Kohen Gadol had to show up with the full isaron in the morning. Fully started in the morning. So you will say, Makriv mechzava boker, or machatzisa umechzava amirayim. And ultimately, again, even though half of it is offered in the morning, half of it is offered in the afternoon. I will say, so by the way, I want to point out, such a tremendous Musa Haskell. I will say, I think the most important lesson that I could say that one learns in their entire schooling career, right? The most, I don't know if they have it today. I should really check my kids' report cards a little bit more, right? But there used to be, in the old days, in the shtetl, right? There used to be a column on report cards when they were still like pieces of paper that you got. Comes prepared to class with books and materials, right? There was a column like that. So I will say, I've often reflected on that a little bit. Probably the most important column in your entire educational maturation. Do you show up prepared? Do you show up prepared? Or do you just spend your life winging it? If you wing it, can you get by? You can, maybe even for a relatively large number of times. But you never really perform because you're just trying to kind of like play catch up constantly. Masha Inkain, when you prepare, whatever it is that you're preparing for, right? Whatever it is, whether it's in your career, whether it's in your relationships, whether it's in your spiritual endeavors, when you come back, this is the pshat. Right? Mishnah Bracha says, Chasidim harishonim hayushoin sha'achas lefnei tefillah. The original pious ones, ultimately, again, would literally, whatever they were doing, meditate, contemplate, cogitate, introspect, they prepared for davening. When you prepare in life for what it is that you want to accomplish, you are so much more successful. If you're always just winging it, if it's always just on the fly, you could encounter episodic success. But even if it's episodic success, it's never going to be full success. When you take the time in life to prepare for whatever it is that you're going to do, that's what it is. So it's incredible. Kohen Gadol, when he shows up in the morning, what does he show up with? He comes prepared with books and materials. He comes with the full isaron. And when you come with the full isaron, that's when you'll find success. Kohen shemevi mechza shachris umeis. So what's the interesting case here? What if the Kohen brings, this is fascinating, what if the Kohen goes ahead and brings the full isaron, and then he goes ahead and he offered up the morning part, and then he died. All right, we'll stop over for today. Ooh, all right. Gotta pick up the pace. This is what happens when I don't have coffee. All right, so let's say good. We'll stop here today. We'll pick up in Meretz with the rest of the Mishnah tomorrow. Meretz Hashem. I'm putting up a Balino Tova shir tomorrow morning at 5:40. I think we normally do before 5:45 a.m. Meretz Hashem. We'll pick up a lot of pace. Meretz tomorrow we'll say Shkoyach. All right, Chavra on Zoom. Good to see everyone. Covered Eretz Yisrael. Wishing you all a freilich and Purim Sameach. And Hashem, Halavai, you and your family should just be safe. Am Yisrael should be safe. Eretz Yisrael should be safe. We should be Zochem, Hashem. To nisim, not the iskasio, not hidden miracles. We should be Zochem, Hashem, to continue to be Zochem. To nisim be'isgalio, revealed miracles, cathartic miracles, overwhelming miracles, Mashiach miracles. Halavai, here, Rabbi Amenu. Amen.